I'll never forget the day I saw that forgotten bank statement on the table. Among the usual purchases, there was always the same amount, every month for a florist. The detail that cut me like a knife was realizing that, in all those years together, he'd never brought me flowers. In that instant, I understood there was something hidden behind that seemingly ordinary routine. I stared at the numbers, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a gift for my mother, I thought, or for a childhood friend. But the amount was recurring, one-off, like a monthly obligation. I felt a pang in my stomach, as if my intuition had finally spoken. That simple piece of paper revealed an uncomfortable truth I didn't want to face. That day, something inside me shifted. His silence, his muffled laughter on his cell phone, began to align like pieces of a cruel puzzle. With each detail, the image of betrayal became clearer. And I, even without concrete proof, knew I was about to plunge into a truth that could destroy me. I remembered when I met Marcos, over 20 years ago. He was attentive, caring, and seemed to see me as a lifelong partner. We had simple dreams, building a home, raising our children, growing old together. That memory felt like a slap in the face when compared to the man who now shied away from my gaze. It was as if I were living with two different husbands. Over time, routine swallowed up some of the passion. He would come home tired from work, while I took care of the house and our teenage son. Still, there was affection. At least I believed so. Small gestures, like a freshly brewed coffee in the morning, or a quick kiss before leaving. But these details slowly began to fade. The space between us grew without me even realizing it. One day I noticed he was arriving home later than usual. Before, he'd usually let me know if he was going to be late. Now, he'd simply show up around midnight, justifying it with extended meeting or heavy traffic. I tried to believe it, but something inside me was pulsing differently. It was as if my intuition was screaming for attention. My clothes started showing signs too, shirts with perfumes I didn't wear, a light touch of makeup on a light-colored collar. I'd run my fingers over the stain and feel my heart race. When I asked, he'd laugh and say, "You're very suspicious. It must have happened in the taxi." I swallowed hard, trying not to sound neurotic. In bed, the distance was palpable. Hasty kisses, warmthless hugs, touches that felt more like obligation than desire. I stared at the ceiling, pretending everything was fine. But inside, it was like sleeping next to a stranger. His body was there, but his mind, I didn't know where. Or worse, with whom. On his cell phone, the signs were even more glaring. He never let go of his device. Before, he'd leave it unlocked on the table. Now, he'd even password protect the calendar app, always with the screen facing down, as if hiding something from the world. I'd watch that automatic gesture and feel my stomach churn. One night, we were on the couch and he received a text message. His reflexes were so quick it seemed rehearsed. He grabbed his phone, typed 2 words, and put it back. When I asked who it was, he replied, "A colleague sorting out something for work." His cool, confident tone left me with no chance to question him. Still, I didn't believe him. I wanted proof. I wanted something beyond my perceptions. Because whenever I tried to broach the subject, he turned the tables on me. He said I was becoming paranoid, that my age was making me insecure. And foolishly, I sometimes even doubted myself. I thought, am I really overreacting? But the signs kept appearing. A receipt left in the car for a dinner for 2. A new bottle of perfume in the glove compartment that was never mine. The excuse was always too convincing, as if it had been practiced. "Oh, I gave a ride to a colleague. I bought the wrong one thinking you'd like it." It was all so rehearsed it sounded like a script. One Saturday, he said he was going to play soccer with his friends. He grabbed his backpack, left excitedly, and promised to return later that afternoon. On impulse, I decided to call one of his old friends. "Have you guys started the game yet?" I asked. The silence on the other end was awkward. "What game? We haven't even planned anything today." My heart raced. I spent the entire day trying to act normal, but my head was spinning in 1,000 directions. Where was he? Who was he with? The clock seemed to stop ticking, and I stared at the door like a prisoner counting the minutes. When he arrived, sweaty and smelling of fresh deodorant, I realized something was off. It was as if he'd been preparing to act. He even brought a bag of bread and cheese, as proof that he stopped at the bakery after the game. I smiled, but inside I felt only anger. That purchase was like a cheap disguise, a curtain to cover the lie. With each detail, the trust within me faded a little more. One morning, while tidying his room, I found a parking ticket inside his pants. The address caught my eye, a hotel downtown. I froze, holding the ticket. It could have been a mistake, but the timestamp coincided with one of the nights he said he'd stayed late at work. I sat on the bed, staring at that receipt as if it were a sentence. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. I knew that piece of paper wasn't lying. And yet, a part of me wanted to believe there was another explanation. It's amazing how the mind insists on protecting us from pain. I began to observe his every move with new eyes. The way he groomed himself before going out, the exaggerated care he took with his appearance, even the change in perfume he wore. They were small things, but they all screamed the same truth. He was no longer mine. He was handing over what I dreamed of to someone else. Some days I'd feel crazy. I'd look in the mirror and wonder, am I seeing things? But soon, a new piece of evidence would emerge, a new suspicious behavior that would dispel any doubts. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was real. All I needed to do was put the pieces together for the whole lie to fall apart. I couldn't smile like I used to. At work, colleagues noticed my distant look. At home, even my son asked me if I was sick. I'd say it was just fatigue, but deep down, it was pain. The pain of suspecting that the life I'd built over 2 decades was crumbling, beyond my control. At night, lying beside him, I listened to the calm breathing of someone who sleeps peacefully. I, on the other hand, suffered from insomnia. I tossed and turned, my chest tightening. He dreamed, and I lay awake at night, devising ways to confirm what I already knew silently. It was then that I decided I wouldn't confront him again without proof. I needed something irrefutable, something that not even he could deny. Because I was tired of being called paranoid. I wanted to show that my intuition wasn't lying, and that deep down, his biggest mistake was underestimating my silence. And it was in this silence that I discovered my most powerful weapon. Every detail observed, every receipt saved, every apology recorded. I was no longer the suspicious wife. I was becoming the investigator of my own life. And he still had no idea how much weight that would carry. With each sleepless night, I grew more determined. With each lie, I grew colder. There were no more tears, only strategy. Love, little by little, was transforming into a kind of silent justice. And the game was just beginning. That week, everything seemed normal. Breakfast was on the table. He left early for work. I took care of my chores. But deep down, I no longer looked at him the same way. It was like watching a movie where you know the ending but have to feign surprise. I was living a routine with someone who hid a second life. The first concrete clue came unexpectedly. I was cleaning the living room when his cell phone vibrated on the sofa. It wasn't a message, it was a voicemail. I found this strange because he never left voicemails, always returning them promptly. I decided to listen, more on impulse than decision. The recording began with the sound of footsteps and street noises. Soon after, I heard his voice, laughing at something. But what chilled my blood was a woman's laughter. It wasn't formal, but intimate, full of complicity. All it took was a few words to know it wasn't work talk. They were talking about a date, reservations, and more discreet parking. The naturalness of it destroyed me more than any visual evidence. There was no exaggeration, just the ease of someone who had been doing this for a long time. I closed my eyes and felt my stomach churn, as if my life had silently shattered. I turned off the recording and stood still, clutching my phone tightly. Part of me wanted to believe I'd misheard. Maybe he was joking. Maybe I'd mixed up the voices. But when he mentioned her name, which I'd never heard before, everything clicked. It was too real to be an illusion. I carefully put my phone back in the same place, so as not to arouse suspicion. I washed my hands as if trying to erase an invisible stain. But the truth had already sunk in. From that moment on, I knew there was no turning back. I wasn't just a suspicious wife. I was someone searching for evidence. That same day, I bought a simple notebook. I assigned it the task of recording every detail. I wrote down the time, date, and exact words of the recording. I did this not to seek revenge in that moment, but to ensure I wouldn't go crazy. The paper would be my ally against gaslighting. Little by little, the records began to multiply. Restaurant receipts left in the car, payments made at odd hours, clothes that smelled of unfamiliar perfume. Nothing seemed like a big deal on its own, but together they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. It was like blindly putting together a jigsaw puzzle. I even began to notice the way he groomed himself. He began choosing better shirts, shoes he rarely wore on a daily basis. I watched silently, pretending not to notice. The mirror reflected a man who seemed more interested in impressing someone outside the home, and that hurt more than I cared to admit. When I questioned why he was late, he said it was a meeting. But I found a hotel parking receipt in his pants pocket. The time coincided exactly with that extra work. I took a deep breath and tucked the paper into my notebook. I no longer needed to convince myself, but I did need to prepare. I began to organize my days differently. I monitored automatic receipts that arrived via email, tracked rides on apps, and noticed patterns. Gradually, my silence stopped being a fragility and became a strategy. He thought I didn't see anything, when in fact, I saw everything. The difference was that now I didn't react immediately. I smiled when necessary, followed my routine, and didn't arouse suspicion. Inside, every detail was recorded. The sound of a key, the change in his perfume, even the way he hid his cell phone. It was all part of the same collection of evidence. One Saturday, he said he was going to play soccer. He grabbed his backpack and left early, as usual. I called a friend of his just to confirm and got the answer I'd feared. There was no game scheduled. I hung up the phone and felt the ground drop, but I held on tight. Another lie fit the pattern. When he returned, he seemed prepared. He was sweaty, dressed in a change of clothes, and even brought bread from the bakery. It was the kind of detail that made me understand. He was rehearsing excuses. Everything was well planned, as if scripted. And now I was the viewer spotting the mistakes. The following week, I decided not just to observe, but to cross paths. I adjusted my schedule to stay close to where he said he was. While they were checking my car, I walked to the hotel on the receipt. I saw with my own eyes him parking and meeting a woman in a light-colored coat. They didn't need to hug for me to understand. I returned to the workshop to a silence that hurt, but also strengthened me. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just wrote. The notebook was no longer just evidence, it was a map. I was charting the path that would lead me to the final decision. What had once been pain was now fuel. With each new lie, my heart grew more resilient. I no longer believed the excuses. I just registered them. I learned to smile at the right time, to avoid unnecessary confrontation. My strength lay in collecting truths he didn't know I had. Even family moments became different. At Sunday lunch, my mother-in-law praised our marriage. I smiled, but inside I felt empty. The family believed in an image that no longer existed, and I didn't have the heart to ruin that show, not yet. As he fell asleep on the couch, I saw a notification flash on the screen. An archived conversation with her name on it appeared for seconds. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't paranoia. It was the final confirmation I needed. My intuition had always been right. I closed the notebook that night, certain I was ready. I didn't need to wait for anything anymore, because I already had everything I needed. The silence he mistook for submission was, in fact, my greatest weapon. And he still had no idea how powerful it was. Over the past few months, I've realized I've begun to change unintentionally. It wasn't just him who was different. I wasn't the same either. My gaze became more attentive, my body colder. Even automatic gestures like preparing dinner became scrutinized. I was training myself to watch without being noticed. One detail that never escaped me was the way he dressed up to go out. He used to wear perfume only on special occasions. Now, even when going to the grocery store, he seemed to choose the best shirt. This sudden vanity for no clear reason made me connect the dots. The person he wanted to impress wasn't inside the house. At work, I began to feel the repercussions of the situation. Colleagues commented that I was distant, more serious. I smiled politely, but my mind was always elsewhere. It was impossible to turn off the suspicion when even the smallest details confirmed my thoughts. The weight of doubt followed me everywhere. A simple incident occurred at family dinner. We were at the table with our son talking about school. His phone vibrated on the table, and he grabbed it so quickly it seemed rehearsed. He pretended it wasn't important and put it back in his pocket. My son and I exchanged silent glances, both aware of the unnecessary haste. It wasn't long before the receipts started piling up again. An expensive restaurant, a coffee shop during business hours, a downtown parking lot. Every piece of paper I encountered seemed to scream at me. I hoarded them like someone collecting rare items, knowing they would one day be useful. It was my shield against the lies. One Saturday, he left saying he had an early meeting. I thought it was strange because the company doesn't usually schedule appointments on weekends. I took advantage of his absence to organize my notes. Looking at everything together, audios, receipts, schedules, I realized there were no gaps. What I feared was written in every detail. Still, I kept watching. I didn't want to act without knowing the right moment. That night, he returned tired, complaining about backlogged work. He even brought a folder of papers as proof, but the stamp I saw on one of them was old, from months ago. It was confirmation that he was preparing excuses. I began to notice how his body gave him away. The way he played with his hair when he was nervous. The way he avoided my gaze. Even the exaggerated silence at certain moments. He thought I didn't notice. But I noticed everything. Lies leave their mark on even the smallest gesture. I told my friend Paula only a part of it, without showing her the entire material. She listened attentively and said I was right to write it all down. "It protects you from doubting yourself," she commented. Her words were simple, but they served as fuel. It wasn't paranoia, it was emotional survival. I started using technology to my advantage. I noticed that his watch, synchronized with his phone, was recording steps in different locations. One day, when he claimed to be at the office, the log showed walks near a distant shopping mall. This contradiction gave me even more confidence. Even his devices were working for me. The changes weren't just in him, they were in me too. I no longer expected goodnight kisses. I no longer sought affection. My focus was on gathering information. It was as if I'd taken on an investigative role without asking. The coldness I'd so shunned became my only line of defense. I also realized that our intimacy had turned to silence. Conversations became superficial, lacking depth. When he spoke, I no longer absorbed, only analyzed. It was an inevitable distance, as if we lived in different houses under the same roof. This distance was more painful than the betrayal itself. A remarkable episode occurred at a Sunday lunch. The whole family was gathered, laughing at the table, seemingly normal. He was praised as a dedicated and hard-working husband. I smiled politely, but inside I felt a pang. The contrast between his public image and his private reality was gnawing at me. That week, I decided to change my strategy. Instead of just recording, I started plotting the next step. I knew a specific date was set. I heard it in a muffled phone call that escaped through the hallways of the house. It was a clear opportunity to catch someone with no chance of excuses. The night before this encounter, I barely slept. He snored peacefully, as if he had nothing to hide. I stared at the ceiling and felt my heart race. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me. I needed to prepare to face it, not just observe. The feeling of living with a stranger was unbearable. Every object in the house seemed to bear witness to the farce. The walls held secrets. The bed felt like a stage of silence. Routine had become a theater where I pretended, but inside I was always alert. This exhaustion was greater than any argument. At his work, I noticed that even his colleagues avoided commenting much to me. Some looked away. Others exchanged short sentences. Perhaps they knew. Perhaps they suspected. This behavior only reinforced my intuition. I no longer needed external confirmation, but every detail contributed to my conviction. On the appointed Wednesday, I woke up feeling different. I felt a mixture of fear and strength. I made breakfast as if it were a normal day, but my body knew otherwise. He hurried out, adjusting his tie, smelling of new perfume. I knew exactly where I was going. I didn't chase after him. I didn't question him. I let him walk away, believing he was safe. With every step he took, the truth came closer to me. I just needed the calm to watch the mask fall. And deep down, I was already prepared to hold this moment without breaking. I took a deep breath, closed the door, and looked at the empty house. It was strange to think that everything we'd built could be finished in a matter of hours. But at the same time, it was liberating to know I was no longer trapped in doubt. I was finally moving towards certainty. That Wednesday, I woke up feeling like my body knew before my mind. I made coffee, organized the house, but every gesture was automatic. He dressed up more than usual, sprayed on too much perfume, and checked his phone 3 times before leaving. The silence between us was heavy, almost palpable. I knew that would be the day. I decided not to follow immediately. I waited a few minutes, rinsed a cup, and turned off the kitchen light. Then I grabbed my bag, put my notebook inside, and left. My heart was pounding, but my mind was cool. It wasn't impulse. It was strategy. I needed calm to avoid messing things up. I got in my car and drove downtown. Every red light felt like a test of patience. The traffic seemed to conspire against me, but at the same time, it gave me time to reflect. I took a deep breath, repeating to myself, "Today, there's no denying it." It was more than a flagrant mistake. It was liberation. I parked a few blocks from the familiar spot. I didn't want to show off. I didn't want to be seen. I got out of the car, adjusted my coat, and walked slowly. My legs felt heavy, made of iron, but they wouldn't stop. I was crossing the border between doubt and truth. When I got closer, I recognized his car. It was parked on the discreet side of the hotel. I stood at a distance, like an invisible observer. A few minutes later, she appeared. A light coat, a small bag, and quick steps. There was no hug, but the way they smiled at each other said it all. The receptionist greeted them as if he already knew them. They entered together, talking quietly. That made me even more certain that this wasn't the first time. It was routine. And what hurt wasn't just the betrayal, it was the naturalness. He lived this parallel life with the same ease with which he came home for dinner. I held my phone with trembling hands. I photographed the car, the time, their entrance. Every detail captured without fuss. I didn't need to shout or chase after him. The simple act of seeing it with my own eyes was more powerful than any explanation he might try to come up with later. I walked back to the car with firm steps. The air felt heavier, but at the same time, I breathed a sigh of relief. The worst was no longer just my imagination. It was right in front of me. And as much as it hurt, there was a strange peace in finally having the proof. I drove to a nearby cafe. I ordered a coffee, sat in the corner, and opened my notebook. I wrote down every detail: time, place, clothing, gestures. I even drew the car's position on the street. It was my way of transforming pain into method. The pen trembled, but it didn't stop. As I wrote, I thought about everything I'd experienced with him. The trips, the birthdays, the promises. It was as if an entire part of my life had been built on sand. And the worst part was, I believed. I trusted with my eyes closed. That naivete now turned into silent rage. I finished my coffee without tasting it. I got back in the car and stood there for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel. I thought about calling Paula and telling her what I'd seen. But I didn't want to, not at that moment. This discovery was mine alone. I needed to digest it alone before sharing it. When I got home, he still hadn't returned. I tidied up my things, prepared a simple dinner, and waited. At 8 o'clock, the door opened. He walked in calmly, kissed my forehead, and said it had been a long day. I just smiled and asked how it was. He told me about a fictitious meeting, about non-existent problems at work. I listened like someone watching a rehearsed actor. Every word sounded like a memorized line. The difference was that I'd already seen the behind-the-scenes of the play, and that made me immune to the script. After dinner, he picked up his phone and sat on the couch. I set the table slowly, watching. He laughed softly, responded quickly to messages, and locked the screen in seconds. It was clear, only I pretended not to see. But this time, the pretense was strategic. I knew the fall was coming. In the shower, I stared in the mirror. I saw a tired but different woman. She was no longer the same woman who blamed herself for distrusting herself. I now had proof. I had clarity. The mirror gave me a steady gaze, one no longer bound by doubt. It was a reflection that gave me strength. That night, I barely slept. I lay beside him and listened to his calm breathing. I closed my eyes, but my mind revisited every detail of what I saw. The parked car, her smile, the ease of them entering together. The images repeated like an endless film. In the morning, he got up early and left for work. I lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the house was different. It no longer hurt. It was as if I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer a hostage to the lie. I grabbed my notebook and organized the evidence in chronological order. The receipts, the screenshots, the photos. Everything was ready, like a silent dossier. It wasn't revenge, It was self-justification. I needed to be prepared for when the moment arrived. And now, nothing could bring me down. As I organized everything, I felt a mixture of fear and courage. Fear of confrontation, courage to finally break free. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but I was certain I would. And that certainty alone was a victory. I was no longer in the dark. At that moment, I closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and leaned my head back against the chair. I knew I would still have to face the pain, the anger, the consequences, but the image of them together would never leave my memory. And that very image would give me the strength to act. The hotel confirmation stuck in my head for days. But curiously, I didn't cry as I expected. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. I went about my daily tasks as usual, but I felt I had an advantage. He thought he was fooling me, but I was already 2 steps ahead. One morning, we were having coffee, and I noticed him watching me from the corner of his eye. He asked why I'd been so quiet lately. I smiled and said it was just fatigue. Inside, I thought, if you knew what I know, you'd keep quiet too. The power of secrecy was almost comforting. I began to notice how he tried to compensate. He bought me fresh bread, complimented my hair, made forced jokes. It all seemed rehearsed, artificial, as if he wanted to divert my attention, unaware that he was only increasing my suspicions. His effort revealed even more to me than the evidence I had hidden. At the gym, a colleague commented that she thought I was more serious. I smiled and changed the subject, but I realized that even my body reflected the weight of the discovery. I was firmer, more composed. The betrayal hadn't just shaken my marriage, it had changed my attitude in the world. It was impossible to hide the impact. I began to appreciate small signs I'd previously ignored. A 10-minute delay, a dropped call, even the way he turned off the car in the garage. Everything had meaning. What was once routine was now a clue. And I became an expert at deciphering his gestures. One Sunday, he said he needed to stop by the company to pick up documents. I waited patiently. Hours later, I found a receipt in my pocket with the same time as the work commute. Except it was from a coffee shop far away. More proof from my notebook. The lie was always in the simple details. I also noticed he'd get restless when I was on my phone near him. He'd casually ask who I was talking to, what I was watching. That made me laugh inside. It was as if he was trying to project the guilt he carried onto me. But I had nothing to hide, only to keep. My son began to notice the tension at home. He asked why his father was always busy and distant. I replied that it was too much work, but it hurt to lie. It hurt to know that he too felt the emptiness. I realized that the betrayal wasn't just between husband and wife, it was against the entire family. One night, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. I saw the name appear for seconds, too quickly to record, but different from his usual contacts. He woke with a start, blanked the screen, and turned around. I remained motionless, breathing deeply. I didn't need to confront him. I just needed to commit it to memory. The following Monday, I left for work and noticed my car's gas tank was almost empty. When I returned, I had driven more miles than the commute to his office would warrant. I realized he was using my absences to get around. I wrote it down in my notebook. Even the speedometer bore witness. I began to prepare my mind for the moment of confrontation. I didn't envision shouting. I didn't want a scene. I wanted something cold, direct, that would leave him with no way out. I rehearsed short sentences in the shower, thinking about his reactions. It was strange, but it gave me strength. I no longer felt like a victim, but a strategist. Sometimes I'd lie beside him and remember the old promises. The forever, the plans to grow old together. Today, every word of those words sounded ironic to me. It wasn't just the physical betrayal, it was the betrayal of the entire life we'd planned. This realization hurt me more than any strange perfume on a shirt. Paula, my friend, called one night, and I decided to talk more. I told her about the hotel encounter, the evidence, and how calmly he'd lied to me at home. She remained silent and then said, "You already have everything. You just need to decide what you're going to do." Hearing this from an outsider made me face the urgency of the situation. At work, I noticed I was more productive, as if the pain had transformed into focus. I immersed myself in tasks to avoid thinking so much. Still, when I received a notification on my phone, my body froze. It wasn't my phone, but it felt like each vibration announced another lie from it. On Saturday, we went to the grocery store together. In the aisle, he seemed impatient, glancing at his watch every 5 minutes. At the checkout, he received a message and went pale for a few seconds. He quickly hid it, but I saw it. His nervousness was proof that the mask no longer held as well as before. I started taking better care of myself in silence. I cut my hair, bought new clothes, and started walking every morning. I didn't tell him anything, didn't ask for his opinion. It was my way of reclaiming the pieces of myself he no longer touched. I needed to strengthen myself for the upcoming decision. That night, while I was putting away the dishes, I heard him answer the phone in the hallway. His voice was low, his laughter was restrained, and a sentence pierced me. "So Wednesday is on." I leaned against the counter and took a deep breath. It was as if life was warning me. The time was coming. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't slam the door. I just took the information in. I went back to the room, and he quickly hung up the phone and said he was a colleague. I smiled, not objecting. But deep down, I knew the timetable for my downfall was already set. In bed, I stared at the ceiling as he fell asleep. His calm breathing contrasted with the turmoil inside me. But this time, there was no desperation. There was a dangerous calm. The calm of someone who already knows the truth and is just waiting for the right moment to act. And in that early morning silence, I realized there was no turning back. The path was set, and when Wednesday arrived, there would be no escape. The end of the farce was closer than he imagined. Wednesday dawned like any other. The alarm clock rang, I made the coffee, washed the cups, but every movement I made carried a different weight. I knew that day would not be like any other. It was the day when truth would cease to be silence and become reality. He left the house in a hurry, adjusting his tie. He kissed my forehead automatically, as if fulfilling a ritual. I noticed his haste, the way he checked his phone before opening the door. I smiled on the outside, but on the inside, I registered every detail. His calmness was my greatest weapon. I waited a few minutes before leaving. I didn't want to give anyone away. I didn't want to appear suspicious. I grabbed my bag, put my notebook away, and took a deep breath. As I started the car, my hands were shaking, but my eyes were steady. It was the beginning of my silent confrontation. The walk downtown seemed longer than ever. Each red light gave me time to think. What would I do if I saw something? Would I have the courage to face it? But I soon remembered. It wasn't about courage anymore. It was about self-justification. I needed to close this loop. I parked a few blocks from the hotel. I got out of the car with measured steps, trying to blend in with the passers-by. The morning chill bit my face, but I barely felt it. I was numb with anticipation. Each step brought me closer to what I knew but still needed to see. Across the street, I recognized his car. It was parked in the same spot as always, discreet, almost hidden. I leaned against a lamppost and watched. A few minutes later, she appeared. A light coat, the same as before, and a smile he never gave me again. They greeted each other without exaggeration, but their looks spoke volumes. They walked together to the hotel entrance, talking quietly. The receptionist greeted them as if they were longtime guests. That naturalness struck me more deeply than the incident itself. It wasn't an adventure, it was routine. My whole body froze, but my mind remained cool. I grabbed my phone and took a picture. A photo of the car, another of the entrance, the time noted. I didn't need to get any closer. I already had what I wanted. Each click was a confirmation that freed me from doubt. I walked back to the car slowly, breathing deeply. My legs felt heavy, but also a strange lightness. I was no longer held hostage by assumptions. Now I had facts, and facts, however painful, bring clarity. It was as if I had walked through an invisible door. I drove to a nearby bakery and ordered a coffee. I sat alone, looking out the window at the street. The clink of cups and normal conversations contrasted with what I had just witnessed. Life went on for others, but for me, nothing would be the same. I grabbed my notebook and wrote down every detail. The color of her clothes, the exact time, the license plate number. I wasn't writing just for the record. I was writing to never doubt myself again. That page was proof that my intuition was unfailing. As I wrote, I remembered all the times he'd told me I was paranoid. All the mocking laughter, the "you imagine too much." I felt a mixture of anger and relief. anger at having been manipulated, relief at having resisted his game. The notebook was my silent victory. When I got home, he was still out. I tidied up, organized the kitchen, made dinner. I did everything as if it were an ordinary evening. But deep down, nothing was ordinary. I knew I was sharing a roof with a man who no longer existed for me. At 8, he walked through the door. The same smile, the same excuse as always. "Tough day at work," he said, dropping his briefcase on his chair. I watched him like someone watching an actor on stage. His every gesture was rehearsed, every word memorized. During dinner, he tried to make conversation. He talked about a meeting, about traffic, about nothing. I responded in short sentences without revealing my emotions. Inside, I just thought, if you knew I saw you today, you wouldn't have the courage to open your mouth. Then he sat down on the couch, picked up his phone, and chuckled softly. I watched him from afar, calmly setting the table. He was so comfortable in his lie that he didn't notice, and this only reinforced my certainty. I needed to decide when to turn the tables. In the shower, I looked in the mirror and saw a different woman. She was no longer the one doubting herself, nor the one crying in secret. She was someone strong, cool, and ready. The reflection gave me courage. And for the first time in months, I liked what I saw. I lay in bed beside him, listening to his calm breathing. I closed my eyes and let the images of the day replay. He and she entering together, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I knew I would never forget that scene, but I also knew it would be my fuel. The next morning, I woke up determined. I made coffee as usual, but inside me I had a new plan. I wouldn't be impulsive. I wouldn't explode. I would choose the exact moment, the right blow, the moment when he would have no escape. And when it arrived, nothing would protect him from the fall. I knew silence was my most lethal weapon. He thought I was distracted, but he barely realized that every detail was already in my hands. The game still felt like his, but the truth was, the control was already mine, and I was ready to show it. He thought the lie kept him safe, but he had no idea that I already held the key to dismantling the entire charade with a single move. That Friday, I woke up earlier than usual. I couldn't stay in bed knowing I was carrying so many hidden truths. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, sat at the table, and stared into space. It was as if routine no longer had any meaning, merely serving as a disguise. He got up minutes later, still sleepy. He walked past me, grabbed his phone, and unlocked it before even saying, "Good morning." This small detail tore at my heart. Before, the first thing was a kiss on the forehead. Now the phone came before everything. As he got ready, I noticed his automatic way of making excuses. He said he had an important meeting and might be late. I said it was okay, my voice calm, almost indifferent. Deep down, I already knew it wasn't a meeting at all. After he left, I closed the door and took a deep breath. I went to the drawer, took out my notebook, and placed it on the table. I flipped through each page calmly, reviewing my notes. It was almost a diary of lies. Line by line, the evidence reminded me that I wasn't crazy. I decided I needed to better organize my evidence. I turned on my computer, opened a password-protected folder, and began scanning the receipts. I scanned each piece of paper, renamed it with the date and time. Everything was there, safely stored, ready to be used. I wouldn't let anything slip through the cracks. In the middle of the afternoon, Paula called me to arrange coffee. I decided to accept. I told her more details than I'd already seen, including his arrival at the hotel. She was shocked, but also firm. She said, "You have two choices, keep hiding it or show that you know." That kept resonating with me. I returned home reflecting on her words. I didn't want to act impulsively, but I knew I couldn't put it off forever. With each lie he told, it became harder to live with him. The doubt was gone, but the weight hurt too. I needed to choose my time. On Saturday, he pretended he was going to play soccer. I just smiled, as if I believed him. But as soon as he left, I went to the closet and rummaged through his clothes. Inside a pocket, I found another restaurant receipt. 2 plates, 2 glasses of wine. It was the same old story over and over again. I folded the paper and put it in my notebook, along with the others. I stared at that collection of lies and realized it no longer hurt as much. The pain had turned to indignation. I no longer cried. I planned. This change gave me unexpected strength. That afternoon, I went to the market and ran into a mutual friend. We chatted briefly, but she commented, "Your husband's been MIA, hasn't he? I haven't seen you two together in a while." I smiled, hiding it, but inside I felt confirmation. Even outsiders could sense the distance. On Sunday, we had family lunch. He was attentive and engaged everyone in conversation, as if he were the exemplary husband. I watched from afar, silently. I noticed how hard he struggled to maintain his perfect image, and this only increased my certainty that I needed to be exposed. On Monday, I tidied the house and organized the closets. While folding clothes, I found a parking ticket in one of his pants pockets. It was from the same hotel. Once again, the proof fell into my lap without me having to look too hard. He left trails because he believed in my distraction. I sat on the bed and stared at the paper. It was small, simple, but it carried the weight of an enormous truth. I held it tightly, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. I put it back in my notebook and smiled to myself. Patience had become my greatest asset. That night, he returned tired and brought cheese bread. He said he'd stopped at the bakery after work. I simply thanked him with a slight smile. It was curious to observe how lies always came with something to distract, as if a simple gesture could erase the dirt behind them. In the shower, I reflected on how everything had changed. I no longer had the illusion that the marriage was solid, but at the same time, I felt stronger than ever. Knowing the truth freed me from living in deception. And that, in a way, was a victory. On Tuesday, I noticed he'd spent more time than usual getting ready. He was clean-shaven, heavily perfumed, and had a carefully pressed shirt. He said he had an important lunch with clients. I simply nodded, but I already knew it wasn't a client. My silence made him too comfortable. I waited for him to leave and for the first time considered following him. But I changed my mind. I didn't need to exhaust myself any further. I'd already had enough. The problem wasn't confirming, it was deciding what to do. The entire test was already before me. Now, the choice was mine alone. In the middle of the afternoon, tidying up the kitchen, I received a notification. It was a purchase on his card, at a restaurant in the same area as always. I smiled to myself, as if reading a ready-made joke. I wrote it down in my notebook and put it in my file. His lie no longer shook me, it only prepared me. That night, he arrived excited, talking loudly, smiling too much. This exaggeration was a dead giveaway. When someone has to try so hard to appear calm, it's because they're hiding something. I listened silently, setting the table, and thought, he has no idea he's already lost control. On Wednesday, I woke up different. I made coffee, tidied the house, and spent more time looking at myself in the mirror. I saw a strong, mature, ready woman. I was no longer the deceived wife. I was someone who carried the truth like armor. And this was reflected even in my eyes. As he prepared to leave, he said he had another long meeting. I just nodded and smiled. Inside, I repeated to myself, "You have no idea what's coming." The power was in the silence, and I knew exactly when to use it. That night, lying next to him, I heard his phone vibrate. A quick message, archived in seconds. He turned onto his side, pretending to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. I wondered how anyone could sleep so peacefully while living so many lies. The next day, I organized my things as if it were routine. Work, grocery shopping, normal tasks. But deep down, I was preparing. I sorted documents, stored files, organized evidence. It wasn't an escape, it was preparation. I didn't want to just catch him in the act. I wanted to show him that nothing would go unnoticed. That afternoon, I spoke to Paula again. I showed her some photos and receipts. She remained silent and then said, "He doesn't deserve a word from you. He deserves the facts." That sentence hit me like a wake-up call. That was it. I wouldn't need to say much. I'd just have to show him. On Friday, he returned late, making up another excuse. I set the table and listened to him speak, without interrupting. It was like watching an actor play the same role for the 1,000th time, and I knew the final scene was near. All that was left was for the curtain to fall. On Saturday, I woke up feeling determined. I grabbed my notebook, organized everything, and put it in a folder. It was as if I were putting together a final dossier. I looked at each piece of evidence and felt a strange gratitude. It brought me back to myself. made me see who I truly was. During breakfast, I noticed he was looking at me strangely. Perhaps he sensed something had changed in me. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes with a slight smile. He had no idea that smile was my victory. That night, I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I listened to the sounds of the house, thinking about what was to come. I knew the moment was getting closer. It was as if I were about to close a book, a painful but necessary book. The silence of dawn brought me clarity. I already had everything. I didn't need to chase anything else. All that remained was to choose how to show that I knew, and that decision would be the dividing line between the past and the future. When I looked at him sleeping, I realized there was no love left, only memories. The man who promised fidelity was gone. All that remained was the facade of a marriage. And I was no longer afraid to tear that facade down. I was ready. He thought he had mastered the story, but he had no idea that every piece of evidence he left behind was the weapon I would use to put an end to it all once and for all. That week, the house seemed quieter than ever. I went about my usual chores, but every gesture was fraught with thoughts. As I made the bed, I found myself remembering how many times he'd promised to always be by my side. Now, every straightened sheet was proof otherwise. He left early, returned late, always with the same excuses. Meeting, new client, project late. I no longer bothered to listen. I just made a mental note knowing it was just a rehearsal. His lie no longer hurt me, it just prepared me. I began to organize my things in silence. I put away personal documents, separated some belongings, and put copies in a hidden folder. It wasn't an escape, it was a precaution. I already knew that I would soon need to be ready to act. Routine became my disguise, but the preparation was real. One afternoon, while tidying his closet, I found another clue. A parking ticket, tucked inside a jacket he rarely wore. The address was familiar, the same as before. I saved it without hesitation. With each detail, the puzzle became even more complete. That same day, he returned with flowers. He handed them to me with a fake smile, as if trying to make up for lost time. I looked at the bouquet and felt a bitter irony. They weren't flowers for me. They were for his conscience. I thanked him silently, but contempt only grew inside me. At dinner, he tried to bring up vacations. He talked about traveling, about renewing the marriage. I listened quietly, chewing slowly. I wondered how anyone could dare plan for the future with a lie in the present. It was like building a house knowing the ground was made of sand. Over the next few days, I noticed he was getting more nervous around me. He avoided leaving his phone lying around, locking the screen within seconds. I just watched. The more he tried to hide it, the clearer it became that he was trapped in his own traps. His composure was slipping. One night, we went out to dinner at a simple restaurant. During the meal, I saw his hand tremble as a notification arrived. I casually asked if everything was okay, and he quickly replied, "It's just work." I didn't need to ask any further questions. His nervousness betrayed everything. In the car, on the way home, the silence was suffocating. He turned on the radio, turning up the volume as if to avoid conversation. I stared out the window, thinking how strange the man behind the wheel was. I no longer recognized the husband who promised to share his life with me. At work, I appeared more focused. My colleagues praised my demeanor, unaware of the burden I carried at home. This external strength was the result of my internal silence. I had already learned that pain, when well kept, becomes fuel for resistance. On Saturday, he said he was getting a haircut. I looked at the clock, 10 a.m. The barber closed at 1 p.m., but he didn't return until 3:30 p.m. His hair was cut, of course, but 2 hours wasn't enough. I wrote it down in my notebook. It wasn't a surprise anymore, just confirmation. That night, I pretended to go to bed early. I watched him get out of bed, grab his phone, and go into the living room. I heard muffled laughter, clipped sentences. Tuesday, as always. My heart raced, but I remained still. It was the missing password. Another date set. On Sunday, during lunch with the family, he was his usual self, kind, attentive, and telling funny stories. My mother-in-law complimented our marriage. I smiled and nodded without saying a word. Inside, I thought, if you knew what was going on, you wouldn't say that again. On Monday, I organized the receipts, photos, and screenshots. I put everything in a simple but sturdy black folder. It was my shield, my dossier. Looking at the collected material, I felt a mixture of anger and strength. I no longer had any doubts. The lie had an expiration date. On Tuesday, I woke up feeling different. I did everything normally, but every gesture was calculated. As I made coffee, I repeated to myself, "Today, the mask falls." I knew I needed to be ready, because once the truth came out, there would be no going back. I waited for him to leave for his work appointment. I gathered my things and this time decided to follow him closely. I drove slowly, keeping my distance but never losing sight of him. Every turn he took felt like I was approaching the end of a cycle. My heart was pounding hard but steady. He parked at the same hotel as always. I watched him get out of the car, straighten his shirt, and go inside. Minutes later, she arrived. The same light coat, the same complicity in her eyes. This time, I didn't just watch. I took out my phone and captured every detail in clear photos. I sat in the car, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. The scene replayed in my mind, but now I had more than just memory. I had visual, concrete evidence that spoke for itself. Doubt was gone. The truth was written on my phone screen. I returned home with a strange calm. I didn't cry, I didn't tremble, I didn't feel angry. I felt clarity. I knew the time had come to turn the tables. The question was no longer if I would confront him, but when. And the answer was closer than he imagined. That night, he came home with the same excuse. He said it had been a long day, that he was tired. I sat at the table, looked at him intently, and smiled. The smile that hid my weapon. He didn't know it, but the lie was about to fall apart. In the shower, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman ready. I was no longer the deceived wife. I was the woman who carried the truth. And this difference was reflected in my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of confrontation. I felt strong. During the week, I prepared in silence. I organized my lines, thought about how I would react. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want tears. I just wanted to present the facts and see his reaction. The power wasn't in the words, but in the irrefutable evidence I had. My son, unaware, asked, "Mom, are you okay?" I hugged him tightly and said yes. But inside, I promised myself, I wouldn't let this lie destroy what was left of us. He deserved to know the truth sooner or later. On Friday, I bought a large envelope and enclosed copies of the key pieces of evidence. I didn't want to show everything at once, just enough. I wrote on the cover, in bold letters, "For when you need it." It was my insurance against any attempt at manipulation. When he arrived home that night, I noticed he was restless. He was constantly checking his phone, constantly getting up and sitting down. I watched silently, like someone who knows the ending of a movie. He thought he was in control, but the story was no longer his. On Saturday, I woke up determined. I made coffee, set the table, and sat across from him. The conversation hadn't happened yet, but I was ready to lay my cards on the table and face him. My steady gaze betrayed that something was about to change. He spoke of banalities, laughed at unfunny things, but I just watched. With every word I thought, enjoy it, because your side of the story is ending. The silence I maintained was no longer fragility. It was foreshadowing. That night, I put the notebook, folder, and envelope away in a safe place. I lay down beside him and pretended to sleep. But deep down, I was no longer the same. The decision had been made. And when the moment came, I wouldn't hesitate. The silence of the early morning brought me clarity. I was no longer thinking, what if? Now it was, when. And when was closer than ever. His every breath beside me reminded me that I needed to act now. And it was in that moment, eyes wide open in the darkness, that I understood. His downfall would not come with screams, but with the cold force of truth. And I was ready to unleash that truth at the right time. He thought he still had time to maintain the farce, but he didn't know that the clock of lies was already ticking down to its final seconds. On Sunday morning, I woke with determination. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the room as if on cue. I made coffee, set the table, and waited. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't afraid. I knew that would be the last day of silence. He appeared minutes later, sleepy, as if nothing had happened. He sat at the table, picked up his phone, and started swiping. His indifference gave me even more strength. I thought, today you're going to look me in the eye without being able to maintain your pretense. I took a deep breath, placed the coffee cup in front of him, and sat down opposite him. Without raising my voice, I took the prepared envelope from my bag. I placed it firmly on the table. He frowned, curious, but still unconvinced. The scene seemed trivial, but it carried the weight of years. "Open it," I said calmly. He looked suspicious, opened it slowly, and began leafing through it. The color drained from his face. There were receipts, photos, screenshots. Each page revealed a lie. Each piece of evidence forced him to face his own life without a mask. He tried to speak, stuttered, and made excuses. "It's not what you think," he began. I raised my hand and interrupted him. "I don't want to hear it. There's no room for your version here. There's only room for the facts." The firmness of my voice surprised even me. Silence filled the room. He was breathing rapidly, trying to find a way out, but there was none. I watched him calmly, as if finally lifting the weight of years from my shoulders. This was no longer the man who shared my bed. He was just an unmasked stranger. I thought about screaming, crying, throwing everything out the window. But I didn't. I just stood up, grabbed the folder with all the evidence, and said, "From now on, every step you take has consequences." He looked at me desperately, as if he realized he'd lost control. I went to the bedroom, opened the drawer, and took out the small suitcase that was already packed. I didn't say anything, just kept it visible. He tried to come closer, but I took 2 steps back. "Don't touch me," I said firmly. For the first time, he silently obeyed. I returned to the living room and sat down again. My son, still asleep, knew nothing, and I wondered how I would protect him from all that filth. The betrayal hadn't just affected me. It had affected our entire family, and I would never forgive that. He started crying, saying he regretted it, that he didn't want to lose me. But his tears didn't move me. I watched him and remembered every excuse, every, "It's all in your head." Now he was the one who was devastated, not me. I let him talk, let him try to justify himself. Each word only reinforced my decision. I no longer felt love, nor pain. I felt only clarity. It was the end, and I had the strength to face it without wavering. I stood up and said, "You'll have to explain it to everyone else, not me." His eyes widened. He realized I wasn't just talking about the two of us, but about friends, family, work. His lie wouldn't be confined to the walls of our house. I grabbed my phone and sent a short message to Paula. "It's done." She replied within seconds, "Good luck. You won." I put the phone away and took a deep breath. I knew my life would change from then on, but I wouldn't go back. Late in the afternoon, I sat alone on the porch. The wind blew against my face, bringing a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in a long time, there was no doubt gnawing at me. The pain was still there, but now there was room for peace. He paced back and forth inside the house, unsure of what to do. I just watched, silent. The scene was clear. He was lost, and I was steadfast. The difference between us had never been greater. As night fell, I decided to sleep in my son's room. I lay down on the small bed, looked up at the ceiling, and felt a sense of relief. It wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it was the future I deserved. A future without lies. The next day, I woke up early and made coffee as usual. But this time I only put out 2 cups, mine and my son's. His absence at the table no longer hurt. It was in fact proof that I was free. I realized my life would go in a different direction. Perhaps with tears, perhaps with difficulties, but without farces. I could start over. And starting over was more valuable than maintaining a broken theater. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought, how many women still live trapped in stories like mine? How many ignore the signs, believing cheap excuses? The truth hurts, but lies kill every day. At that moment, I understood that I hadn't lost anything. He was the one who lost. I had gained myself back. And if it were you, would you have the courage to open the envelope?